Today I'm with self-defense expert Adam Jolly. Adam, I think most people don't have a clue how to protect themselves in the street if they ever got into an altercation. What do you think?
I think that's fairly accurate, actually. And there's a couple reasons why. First and foremost, for your listeners, hi, I'm Adam. As far as self-defense in my background, I started off in learning martial arts like most people that learn self-defense. Did that as a pup. But one of the advantages that I had is that I had a father who had an extensive background in law enforcement and personal protection, went on to going into Secret Service. So I was very blessed to have a background where I was learning martial arts from the perspective of real world application. And so when it comes to your question, your thought with why most people may or may not know a lot about how to defend themselves, a lot of it has to do with their environment. My environment was blessed where I had a constant opportunity to learn about different aspects of human behavior and environmental behavior. And just like you probably have seen at parks where it'll say, do not feed the birds or the ducks because they'll become dependent. The same thing has happened with humans when it comes to their survival instincts. A lot of people, in my opinion, do not really have that survival instinct anymore because they're not in an environment of stress where they're having to worry about foraging for food the same way or worrying about predators killing them in the same way that a lot of other animals in the animal kingdom have constantly been going about their life for thousands of years. And so because we're in a society that's a lot more blessed, there's a lot more opportunity for food and safety and comfort in comparison to any other time in history. A lot of people do not have the same amount of forethought or preparation in being preventative with their self-defense. And so, yes, most people do not actually know how to defend themselves. And if they were in that altercation, they would not know what to do with themselves.
Can you give us an example of where you've had to use your self-defense skills in real life?
Sure. Most of the time when it comes to self-defense, like I said, my background started off with martial arts, and then I joined later on the military. I was in the 82nd Airborne, and currently now I'm a certified peace officer in the United States, which basically means that I have the capacity of taking on the job of law enforcement, which is what I currently also do right now as part of serving my community. And so one of the examples would be that you, first and foremost, do not want to get into a fight. That's what is said by every martial artist out there, every self-defense expert out there, that you do not want to get into a fight. And so you try to de-escalate the situation. So most, if not I'd say 98% of my altercations, what could have been altercations, ended up actually being diffused because of using verbal judo, so to speak, as coined by Dr. George Thompson. So the idea is that you try to avoid those situations. But one of the times where I had an altercation, there was a person who was very adamant, very irate. They seemed like they were under what was called the 3 deadly Ds. For those of you that do not know, the 3 deadly Ds are as follows: drugged, drunk, or deranged. And why these are dangerous is due to the fact that people, when they're under one of these influences, can actually end up having a diluted or reduced pain threshold system. So in other words, if I were to punch that person in the face, they may not feel it the same way. If I kick a person in the groin, that person may not feel that pain the same way. That pain is reduced. And so especially with people that are under the influence of different drugs, especially things like PCP, those kind of drugs can actually make it so that they are super strong, super irate and violent, and nothing you can say or do will actually stop them from moving forward. And so one of these people that I was encountering out in the street, very irate and incoherent, and they actually approached me first. They just looked at me, made a beeline for me. And I wasn't a police officer at the time, but what had happened was I ended up having to make space. That was the first thing, because again, we don't want to get into a fight. It's not like a kung fu movie. It's not like Jackie Chan where you just walk up, do this really sweet strut, and then start getting into a fight in the middle of an alleyway. So with that being said, I had to try to make space. That was my first thing. Anything, a table, a car, whatever I could do. Luckily, I was by myself. If I was with my family, that would be a completely different scenario where I would have to engage. similarly to how a lot of male birds are bright in color and a lot of female birds are not bright in color because the male is made to go out there and say, here I am to the predators. That's what I would have had to do with my family and basically make sure that attention was put on me, because if I ran and tried to get cover and my family wasn't there, that'd be a problem. So with that being said, that person came up to me and luckily I was able to use minimal force on this individual and was able to get assistance from another person to create that space and get away and disengage. There was minimal contact made. The idea, again, is that you do not want to harm people. You want to make sure that your safety and the safety of others it comes first. And so when this person tried to grab a hold of me, I was able to break from that grip, push that person away, create that space, and I basically circled around the table a couple times. Now, this doesn't sound super glorious. It doesn't sound like very, if you will, sexy, but the idea is it's about self-defense. It's not about winning a fight. And that's where I think a lot of martial artists misconstrue and misunderstand and even misrepresent what self-defense really is. Self-defense is about preservation of yourself and of others. And that includes the person that's trying to hurt you. Law enforcement do this all the time. When a law enforcement person, at least where I'm from in the United States, when you are in a situation with an individual who is similar, where they're irate or incoherent, under the influence of something, you're not there to just beat the tar out of them. Now, I know on the news, there's times all over the world where law enforcement individuals make mistakes. I'm not going to speak to that. I'm not going to excuse that behavior or analyze that behavior. But what I know that I've been taught when I went through academy and went through training, and even before that, where I was learning self-defense from my father, the bottom line is you want to diffuse, de-escalate, and make sure that everybody can come out safe. If you can not get into a fight to begin with, that is the ultimate win, because no one comes out hurt. No one comes out, the loser, so to speak, because in martial art tournaments, that's what it is you spar and you have a winner and a loser. In this case, there are no winners in a violent encounter. And so trying to create space and minimize that situation was the first priority in my mind, because then we can minimize that situation, minimize the damage. And like I said, for law enforcement officers, you're supposed to try to diffuse and de-escalate before you go into any force, because in the end, if things escalate, if things get worse and that person does not comply with your demands and you are physically trying to use force, that can escalate to deadly force. And deadly force is what it sounds like. That's where it's absolute. There is no coming back from that. And the idea is to end that person, because there's nothing else that you've been able to do to keep yourself safe or other people. And to tie that in, I think that's one of the disconnects with self-defense, especially in Western cultures. In the United States, we have firearms. We have what's called the Second Amendment. And whether one disagrees or agrees with the Second Amendment, for this point doesn't matter. In the end, a lot of people that carry do not necessarily have the training and the background of understanding force continuum, of knowing when to use that. And because they don't have the physical skills to, in hand to hand, to back up what they have on their waistband or on their hip, aka the firearm, it can actually end up being to where somebody who has no skill set, all they have is that gun to defend themselves, and they can go right to deadly force. And that's a problem. And so a lot of people still need those vital skill sets, like from Krav Maga or from some other martial art, with the mentality of protecting yourself hand to hand first, because you need those options before you escalate to that deadly force.
I think what a lot of people don't understand is that to learn even basic skills like Krav Maga, you have to repeat them a lot. And I'm not just talking about doing a couple of hours once a week for a few weeks. You have to almost like continually practice them, or you forget them. It's like learning to ride a bike or play some computer game really well. It's not just like something you add on. It's, you have to sort of make it a culture of your life. And for me, I do a lot of practicing of just the movements to keep my muscles in shape, because I've ever had to use those, even if I'm strong in the gym, in self-defense, a lot of these movements, you could pull a muscle really badly and rip things. So you just to keep those tendons strong, those muscles strong, sharp, so that you can then project that force if you have to, God forbid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that's kind of a problem. The disconnect and the problem with what martial arts and self-defense had, even a couple thousand years ago versus today is very different. The attention span in society is completely different. TikTok, YouTube shorts, those kind of things have made it and conditioned a lot of the new generation of people to be conditioned for fast, quick, instant gratification, really. And because of that, a lot of people have a hard time sticking out with things that are not gratifying. We want to move towards pleasure and move away from pain. And majority of the time, uh, people would rather, if they had to pick between moving through a bunch of pain to get to that ultimate pleasure, most people will not do that. They'll stay away because they'd rather not feel that pain or that discomfort. And that's why a lot of people are unsuccessful in life with certain goals in business, because they have to be disciplined, give up playing video games or eating Cheetos or what have you. And so with martial arts, the whole premise is discipline. And 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, when you don't have the same distractions and opportunities that we have today, something like putting your effort and pain and discipline into something like martial arts versus some of the other options they had, which was a lack of options, that was a lot easier to do. Today, we are so distracted by things that most people don't want to put that time and energy. And yeah, you can pull a muscle, you can get injured. And because it is if you will, a contact training situation or a contact sport, a lot of people can actually end up getting injured while training. And that also is unattractive. And so the mentality is different. And so for martial artists out there, for self-defense instructors out there, I just always try to pose the question, how do we adapt to the environment? Because each person back in the day had to adapt to their environment. China, and Japan and whatnot, you have those martial arts weapons like the nunchakus or the bow, the sai. A lot of people don't realize or don't pay attention to the fact that those were farming tools. They didn't have the access to swords and weapons the same way. And so they had to adapt farming tools into a way to defend themselves. And, as far as that was their environment. That's what they did to adapt to that environment. What are we doing now to adapt to our environment to make sure that people are learning how to defend themselves? And because of that short attention span, maybe we can't necessarily pursue or expect as teachers and people who are trying to make sure others are able to protect themselves. Maybe we don't have the opportunity to go long form with most people, but maybe can we figure out what the baseline bottom bare minimum they need to at least have under their belt as a tool or a set of tools in case they do come into a violent situation, so that they can at least come out, or a better chance to come out safely and unharmed than if they didn't have those skills in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Even just like in terms of like people play all these computer games and they get excited about them leveling up, but you can also level up your own skills. Then you get physical benefit of it. Even just like taking a stick this size and just swing it around. I found that it helped my RSI because it stretched my arm in a certain way that my arm's not doing every day at the keyboard. Or even just taking two hands and a longer stick like a spear and swinging that around. It's a great workout. But then again, you got to find a place you can do that. It's kind of people don't do things like that much nowadays. So if you're in the park swinging a stick around, people probably think you're crazy. But we didn't have computer games and you're living in the wild. The cavemen and the Roman soldiers and that, they were swinging about all these swords to get stronger and better at them, or catapults or bows and arrows. But it's a lot more fun and than just leveling up your experience in some computer game or something like that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that makes computer games so addicting. I love playing video games when I take the time to do them. My family, my kids, they play video games once in a while. My wife, actually, is a streamer in the past. Like we enjoy video games. We understand that there's a lot of, if you will, fun that can come out of it.
Sure. Yeah.
But the thing is that that's also part of that instant gratification problem, where people are able to level up and get that sense of achievement without the physical tiredness and the effort that your body has to exert when you're at, that what a lot of people forget and a lot of fitness people understand is that when you are working out and you're busting your butt and then you finish, you get that like high and you just feel good. You're like, man, I accomplished something. I hate running. In the 80-second, we ran all the time and I absolutely despised it. And yet at the end of every run, I'd sit there and go, oh man, nice. Like I feel good. And when we put ourselves in those situations to level up, like you said, to discipline ourselves and focus on specific goals of what we want to accomplish, and take that time to be disciplined to get to that goal, to go through that discomfort in order to get to that end result and satisfaction of what we are going for. That's where things start actually doing a snowball effect in method, where you start getting addicted to that end result, to that satisfaction of going through something hard to accomplish that task. And so, absolutely, like you feel like you level up when you are doing something like that. It's just amazing.
I don't have a gym membership. I just find going to the gym is quite boring. So I sort of mix up my workouts throughout the day. I'll just do a few things here and there. I'll do a few practice kicks, a few bit of air boxing, just to sort of almost just make my back less sore when I'm sitting down programming all day long. And in terms of jogging, I find jogging in a circle really boring. So what I'll do is I'll basically, if I'm going to go somewhere and that's going to be a 20-minute drive or like a 20 minutes to go to the train, I'll just run there, even if it takes like an hour. But then I'll basically stop halfway through there, do some work on my laptop. Then I'll cool down a bit and then I'll do the rest of the run there. Maybe I'll have time to wash my armpits in the disabled toilet, something when I'm there to make, like I did tonight. But then I did it. My back's a little bit sore. I just kind of pull a muscle, but it's all right. It'll repair itself. So, and also just like for me, self defense is also staying physically fit. And if I ever had to escape somewhere, then being able to run with a rucksack is a good skill to have. It's a sort of semi rare insurance policy.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, and that's the kind of the thing with the insurance policy idea, is that you can actually build your own insurance policy, if you will, mentally, by saying, okay, what is my self-defense insurance policy? We have other policies before where we have car insurance and insurance policies for fire, for floods, for our homes, death and insurance, so to speak. I mean, we have all these different policies, and self-defense is no different. But there isn't something out there that says, hey, we will immediately send somebody to protect you. The closest you have is law enforcement, and law enforcement isn't going to show up, anytime soon, because you're in the middle of that crap right now. And so by fitness, tying into fitness is like, that's something that you can put into your own, if you will, insurance policy, where like, okay, these are the things that I need to have to protect myself and keep myself safe. And so you can take, I need to learn a physical skill set. I need to have a basic level of fitness. And I say basic. I mean, I know we see in action movies these people that are super fit, 6-pack abs, large muscles, and they're doing all these amazing things and fighting and shooting and jumping out of helicopters and stuff. But like, that's a misunderstanding of like what you actually need to protect yourself. You only need a basic level of fitness. You need to be able to do some basic body weight squats, some push-ups, some things like that. Something that makes sure that you're mobile, and obviously flexibility is important as far as your joint mobility. You don't need to do the splits. I can't do the splits. I never have. I've never been flexible in that way, but I've never been in serious injury because I make sure that my joints and my range of motion is well intact for what I am doing and how I'm doing it for my environment. And so you can actually take that and basically write down your goals of what things you want to better yourself, to protect yourself, because nobody else is going to be able to protect you the same way that you can protect you. And, unless you're a really very well-off person that can pay for a bodyguard, you're going to need to take the time to work on the physical skills and work on the fitness and have that mental preparation that if something were to happen, how would I go about doing it? I'm sure you do it all the time, and others have done it all the time, where you visualize, okay, what kind of program do I want to make? How is it going to look? How is it going to operate? You write that out and map that out. And then you get to the how from there. How do you get there? And the same thing happens with self-defense. You need to look at, okay, what kind of things in my environment do I need to be concerned about? Do I need to be concerned about gang violence in my area? Do I need to be concerned of robberies? Or do I need to be concerned of, God forbid, a mass shooting? These are the things that you consider. And then you have to make sure that you have these skill sets and you work towards the skill sets to better prepare yourself for the environment that you are in. Traveling the same way. If you're traveling, you need to understand a basic idea of what environment you're going into. Whose territory are you going into if you're talking about from a predatory standpoint? Just the other day, there was a thing on the news that had 4 Americans that were captured by some what they believe to be cartel members right there at the border of the United States and Mexico. I mean, these things happen. And so whether or not we'll see what the truth of that matter is as far as who got captured when or how, that's for another time, and we'll have to just see where that goes. But the idea is where you're at. I mean, you got to pay attention to your environment and know what the risks are. And by working towards those goals and building that, if you will, insurance policy for yourself, you'll be able to respond, more appropriately to the situations that you're in.
Yes, for me, self defense is basically increasing the probability of a good outcome. There's you could go extreme, like you could say there's you'll never be perfectly safe and you'll never be perfectly in danger. So if you wanted to be extremely safe, you'd basically find a missile silo that's been used and sold for people to use. You'd be in that bunker, lock the door. You'd have a Kevlar vest on, Kevlar hat, and you just basically sit there and not move the whole rest of your life. That is the most safest place that you can be, right? As soon as you go
Absolutely.
outside, you're exposed to a sniper 2 miles away or an asteroid or, something like that. So you got to sort of live your life in a way, but also minimize the chances of getting a bad situation. And so for me, I'm basically not training to defeat an MMA fighter because that's just not. I don't have the time to do it. I'm 38 and I'm not kidding myself. So I'm basically just want to be fit enough to avoid somebody who's just crazy and just starts swinging whatever like that. Just the average Joe that's for whatever reason just wants to come and whatever mess up something important around me or me. That's basically what I'm trying to train to avoid.
Absolutely. And so when you think about some of the things that you may do or have to do, being quick, being mobile, being able to maybe vault over a set of handrails. So from a defensive standpoint, a lot of people don't realize that parkour and free running, which is very sensationalized now, it's something that I practiced for a number of years, and I was obsessed with it. And part of it had to do with the idea of being able to move from point A to point B in the fastest, most direct way possible. And that has obviously changed and evolved to being more showy and showing off skill sets and what the human body can do, whether that be doing backflips off buildings or things like that. The point is that parkour originally stemmed from basically in France, and it was derived from my understanding as part of what the French military, the special military, had actually used to move quickly. And they actually had obstacle courses, and then it was taught to a man by the name of David Bell, who was the son of one of the French military members many, many, many years ago. And then he turned it into a game with his friend, Sebastian Foucan. If you don't know who Sebastian Foucan is, he's actually someone who was the guy that starred in the first Daniel Craig James Bond movie, Casino Royale. He was the guy that he was being chased and doing all the jumps on the cranes and stuff. And so what's interesting is that parkour was made to engage or disengage quickly. You were able to you go through your urban environment fast. And so when you're talking about getting away, if you were to train with the mindset of self-defense, you could actually pick up some different aspects of parkour and movement. Like I said, vaulting over rails, moving quickly over tables, and actually if you do those motions, not only are you getting a decent workout in, but you're also learning how to disengage quickly and how to create space for yourself from someone who's trying to run you down, which is to the point of what some of your goals are when it comes to protecting yourself.
Yeah, I remember growing up in the council estate, I was once chased with a gang of bottles, and I'd easily outrun the lead gangster. the gangster, I'm talking teenagers, but still, like if a bottle's serious, they were all probably drunk, so I just outrun them. I ran about 100 meters, didn't even feel tired because the adrenaline was high. So I definitely recommend working on your sprinting skills. And then,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how desperate they are, you want to be able to run semi-fast for like a mile or something like that without, that's probably if the guy still chasing you after a mile, then it's, yeah, probably some kind
Yeah,
of like special agent or something.
no, for sure. Like that, the interesting thing is, for most people, you should be able to run a decent bit. I mean, we were made to move, we were made to run because of the environment that we were initially created in. But because of the comforts that we have in society, we don't need that in the same way as much, if at all. And so, for those of us that are maybe a little overweight or out of shape, well, then that's where you can analyze yourself and go, okay, what if I'm in this situation, what skills do I have? If I can't run away very well, Maybe I work towards learning how to run away and get away very well, which means I may need to work out more and lose that weight, or I may need to change my diet. Or if you're like, I really like eating my potato chips and I don't want to do that, that's fine, I guess. I mean, this is your own, if you will, again, insurance policy. So you should be able to turn around and decide, okay, if I'm not going to do this, then what else can I do? And so for those of us that maybe aren't capable of running in the same way, I would just suggest that you analyze what other options you have, whether that be being very, very quick with your hands and feet, which means learning how to fight back a little bit. If you're not super good at running, maybe you can still be very good at cardio, even if you're not the fastest person, because maybe you're a larger person. The point is that we need to analyze what our capabilities are, what our goals are with self-defense, and then be able to take that and adjust accordingly to keep ourselves safer individually.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I'm a lot of situations I'd be okay. I'm almost 80 kilograms, good muscle mass, keep myself in shape. So I'm not that afraid to go outside. But I don't know I can't imagine what it must be like for a woman to going out, because they're a whole other set of events could affect them that wouldn't affect me. So yeah, all the self-defense training is going to be exponentially harder for women, and I don't have an easy answer for that.
Absolutely. I mean, so one of the things that I learned was when it came to teaching women, because part of what I did was not only learn self-defense, but I actually went through a time where I taught self-defense for a number of years. Over 15 years, I've been teaching since I was a lad, different people, adults and kids, self-defense. And when it came to women's classes where we would do women's self-defense, one of the interesting things was, especially for mothers, you would say, okay, if someone were to grab you by the throat and start trying to strangle you, what would you do? And most of the time they would give different answers, but it'd mostly be inaction. It'd mostly be just hesitation, fear, and so on and so forth. And then you would ask the same question, but you'd say it with a different person. You'd say, okay, now if your son or your daughter were to be grabbed by the throat from the same individual, what would you do? And before you even finish the question, they'd say, oh, I would, they would say all the horrible things in that moment that they would take action on to stop this person from harming their loved one. And then the question would be asked, well, why don't you do that for yourself? And so the part of the problem is making sure that you teach people, in particular women, that it's okay, making sure they understand that it's okay to be violent for themselves on their own behalf. They have people that count on them the same way that, I have people that count on me. There's people that count on you. And so that's kind of the first step, is that mental understanding and preparation of basically acceptance and saying, I can act if I so choose. The second is that because there are, and I know this is not the most popular thing, but there are differences in, strength and speed from a general standpoint. There are exceptions to the rule. Like, for instance, when I was in the military and I tried out for Special Forces Assessment Selection, one of the, and I'm not going to talk too much about that. I didn't get selected. That was the bottom line. I didn't get selected. I'm not going to make excuses. But the point was, there was a person, and I'm going to call them Amy. Okay. And she was also in selection, and she was an absolute monster. She was so fit. She outpaced the boys, or the majority of the boys, all the time. I mean, in everything, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups. There are exceptions to every rule, but generally most people aren't, even men don't go to that level of peak performance in their athleticism or their ability to fight. And so when it comes to people, it doesn't matter if they're bigger or smaller. One of the first things to mentally prepare and train for is understanding targets. And what I mean by targets are targets of opportunity. So instead of being the strongest person and throwing a punch and knocking them out, maybe you poke their eyes. Maybe you actually bite them. Maybe you hit them in the groin. These are things that are illegal in boxing, in the UFC, in jiu-jitsu, because they are injury creating things that, and targets. And so, that's part of it too for women is learning those targets, especially on men, that may accost them, and understanding those targets and knowing what to do afterwards, which is After I hit that person in the groin or bite them on, like the face or the jugular or something, or poke them in the eye, what's my next step? I need to get out of there as quickly as possible. I need to call the police, or do I need to follow up with another strike? In understanding what those strikes do and how. For instance, if you hit someone in the groin, typically for men, what happens? You double over and fall to the floor most of the time. Maybe though that person just doubles over a little bit. Well, if you poke a person in the eye, what typically happens? Their head goes back, their hands go up to their face, and because they have to protect whatever is poking your eye. That's what happens. And so understanding what those actions and reactions do will dictate your next action. And so for women, I would just say, for those that are listening, understand that coming from a position of self-defense, I would highly suggest learn those type of things. Find a martial art expert or some sort of other system that teaches you those injury producing strikes, not just how to be a good puncher or a good kicker, but actually where they're going to teach you to strike, and then put in those repetitions in particular. The one thing that I'll say that's a universal thing for men and women that is probably the most important, if not definitely the most important thing you can learn in self-defense, and that is situational awareness. Situational awareness is basically understanding your environment. And when you walk into the mall and you look around, what do you see? You're paying attention. Who's there? That doesn't mean you're paranoid. That just means you are aware. You're not there to be fearful. You're not doing this from a place of fear. You're doing this from a place of preparation. You are understanding your environment. When people go out and hunt certain animals, and the deer, like we watch it in TV when someone's hunting, and the deer, perks up and looks around and then thinks, oh, this is a bad idea, and runs away. That's what we're talking about, is like being aware. They're just, hey, I smell something different. I hear something different. Something is off, and trusting your intuition on that. So when you're in that mall and you see something that seems off, don't let logic necessarily overrule your thought process. Analyze it, take it in, know where your escape routes are, where your exits are. And if you feel like something's off, then listen to it and move away from that place. The worst thing you can do is ignore that intuition, ignore that inner voice that's inside you, or that gut feeling you have, and then something bad happen. How many times have we said, man, I knew I shouldn't have done something, or I knew I shouldn't have made that decision or gone that way? I mean, that's your intuition talking, and that's you saying, man, I should have listened to my intuition. And so being aware of your environment, where you're going, who's there with you, who's looking around at you, what do they have in their hands? These are all things to pay attention to, and that'll solve 90% of your problems when it comes to self-defense. Because if you can see something coming before it actually is there, then you're able to move away or ignore or like avoid that situation entirely.
Mm. It's almost like a science project or sociology project, watching and observing people. The closest altercations I had recently was basically the London Underground, because everybody's all crammed in together, and you get some wild actors there. So I've seen a few angry people, but I've sort of managed to play along with them a little bit to make them feel like not everyone's against them. So that's how I got some of the tension off them and somebody else. So this person was basically, I don't know what he was doing. He's annoying people, but I was just like not joining in what he was doing, but just sort of acknowledging him there, and then he sort of. I mean, I was more happy him spending time looking at me and talking to me, laughing with me, than he was probably talking to somebody who could freak out. I just like observing people in general, just trying to look at their clothes and where they've been, and sort of do a little bit of Sherlock Holmes on them, just trying to put together what they've been doing the day before, the afternoon. It's kind of fun as well, and brighten up your day a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I'd suggest, you could almost make it a game for yourself. So one of the ways that you can train, because most people are not going to be super aware. I don't know about you, but there's been a number of times in my past where I've driven home and gone, wait, how did I get home? Like your mind just not there. And that's because you're used to that environment. You understand where you're going, how you're turning, you understand those things. But when you're in bigger areas, or like where you said, or even like, let's pretend it was on a subway, a tram of some sort, you're getting down and you're in there, and as you're going along to your location, you just need to look around. A lot of people are taught it's rude to make eye contact. But that's also what criminals look for. They look for the timid, weak appearing type people that are not confident. You don't necessarily need to come off like narcissistic, but it's more just it's okay to look around, and if you make eye contact with someone, you make eye contact with them, you look away, and you go back to what you're doing. But at the same time, you can use your peripheral vision to notice what other people are doing as well. And as like you said, from a sociological standpoint, the game could be when you're about to walk into a room. Let's say you're walking into the train, and you're going to say to yourself, when I go walk in, I'm going to find how many people are wearing the color red, just because. Or when I walk in, I'm going to find out how many people are wearing hats on their head. And what this is going to do is allow you to quickly summarize key things that you are looking for information. And so when you walk in and you start going down inside the train cart and you count 7 hats, okay, you have 7 hats. The next time you could say how many have beards, and then move on down the line and just basically vary these different things that you are rapidly obtaining. And then that also teaches your mind to quickly grab information without you having to really necessarily engage too harshly on being worried about every little thing that someone's doing. Again, we're not trying to be paranoid, we're trying to be aware. And so after you start doing that and your mind gets conditioned, then you can turn around and start going, okay, now I'm going to look for things that are off. And whatever that means to you is what it means to you. But like, if you notice that somebody has really thick clothing and it's hot out, why are they wearing thick clothing? That's strange. Oftentimes people wear thick clothing when they have a weapon on themselves, whether that be a machete, whether that be a large firearm, like a rifle of some sort. A lot of people wear that stuff when they want to cover it very easily. And so maybe it's a hot summer day and somebody's wearing really thick clothing. It's like, okay, what's going on with that? What are they doing? Are they looking around? Do they seem nervous? You pick up on those things, and then that's when you can make those decisions to move away quickly to get to a safer location. And then that's when you can call it in if you feel like, hey, this is something where law enforcement or somebody else should come in and respond. So starting off it as a game and then moving up to more and more complicated algorithms, if you will, of how to process that information quickly. That's how you'll develop that situational awareness, and then how you'll be able to naturally, just as you're going about your day, having fun with your friends or your family, pick up on those things quickly.
Mm-hmm. Nowadays, we also have to deal with things like the completely random events, seemingly random, with suicide bombers. And anyone who's lived in London, even near a few years after the bombings there, when you're traveling in the underground, people were really scared because you're basically in between these deep stations, and you're just like, as soon as you get to a station, you sort of relax a little bit. I experienced a little bit myself, and it's there's no way to defend against something like that. So it's just things that I try and reduce, things like the things that you can't control. But then again, you can't just let terror, take away your peace in life. And going back to what you're saying about the reason that they say sometimes like a well-armed society is a polite society, and your martial arts experts, we know, they basically say try and avoid fights at all costs, because the more you know about combat and weak points of the body, the more humble you are at, and you realize how you don't want to be somebody to stick a finger in your eye or punch you in the neck, because you're going to suffer, or how easy it is to break a limb or kneecap you or snap your elbow. If you just don't know what people know, and if you get into some fight with somebody, then they might know that stuff, and they might just they might have trained it well, and then it's you've broken a limb or you've been poked in the eye. So you always want to de-escalate as much as possible.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a true fact. I train a lot. I have a lot of years of experience, but I know there's people that can kick my butt very, very easily. There's always somebody better than you. There's always somebody stronger, faster, more deadly than you are. It doesn't matter. You're always going to have somebody somewhere, and you don't know who that is, like you said. And it's better that you have that capability to diffuse and de-escalate. And for those of you that may not be sure what that is, that are listening, de-escalation is using your ability to, instead of being them versus me or me versus you, it is about how you can make sure that that gap is crossed to a collaborative standpoint, which is it's counterintuitive to what we view as a self-defense situation. So if you think that, like, for instance, the actual fight itself, where you are actually hitting somebody or somebody's hitting you, to be kind of the end result, and you had the initial noticing that person being angry and coming towards you as the beginning result, then your de-escalation in verbal judo, or your verbal abilities to be a defensive communicator, come in between. It's somewhere in between. And so when you are talking with somebody and someone says, "Hey, I don't like your face, get out of here." I mean, as a dumb example, that would be something where you have a couple options. And for those of you that play like RPGs, this is where the little bars come out, or like what those game shows that give you the option, they give you 4 options of what to pick the answer is. This is one of those scenarios where you get to then decide, what's my answer? How am I going to respond to this? And most of us naturally want to respond negatively. Hey, screw you, guy. I don't care. What do you want? Get out of my face. And dismiss them. That's one option. Most of the time, that's where it's going to escalate and things could get worse, because they're looking for that response. They want the excuse. The other option could be something like, yeah, I do have a pretty ugly face. I'm sorry that it offends you. It offends a lot of people. I mean, you could literally say that, and it's you just, or you could say, like, literally, my wife left me because of that, man. I get it. It's like, oh, what do you think I should do? Like, I've tried all sorts of things. I've tried getting, mascara. I've tried, trying clown makeup. I've tried a lot of things. It doesn't work. Can you help me? I don't know what to do. And that
Yeah.
really throws people off. It really makes them taken aback, because you are playing their game better. And so the idea is that now they have to find another excuse or another reason. And most of the time they'll just laugh and go, man, this guy's an idiot. This guy's a weirdo. And that's fine. Let them think what they want. You just move on with your day. Hey, do you have any tips? Yeah, get out of here and go get some makeup. You know what? I'll do that, sir. Have a good day. Thank you for that. Do you have any specific ones you think I should get at the makeup store? Whatever it is. Like, seriously, make it so that you're fighting on your terms. That is a fight. That's a dance. You are having a social interaction, and you are dominating because you are, in martial arts, they have hard blocking, where you will stop something with your arms or with your fists, or in boxing, you'll cover up and you'll meet that strike. In this case, meeting that strike would be like saying, like I said earlier, hey, I don't care what you say, guy, get out of my face. That's where you're hard stopping it. But this one's more like in other martial arts, where you are doing what's called a parry, or redirecting. You're redirecting that energy. And that's the same thing here. You're just, agreeing with that guy or gal, and just moving forward with it, and take it to a ridiculous level. It's already ridiculous, make it more ridiculous. And it just really can diffuse the tension very, very fast. So that's one short example of how using a de-escalation tactic can work. One more that I'll share that's very common is that if someone has a problem with something that you do or say, that you summarize. And what I mean by that is, if someone says something along the lines of, hey, if you don't turn around and walk out of the bar right now, I'm going to kick your butt. Let's put it that way. And what you do is summarize. You'd say, okay, let me make sure I understand you, sir. If I don't leave, this is what you're going to do. And you would summarize what they say. You're summarizing, basically initiating that you are listening. This is a very dumb example, a very quick example off the top of the head. But the idea is that you respond, instead of being combative or misunderstanding what they're saying, you make sure that they believe that you are listening to them, which then gives them the semblance of control and power. And by doing so, it allows them to not move forward as quickly with escalating the situation or calling into action. And then from there, you have to make that decision. Not always do we need to do what somebody says or agree with them. But the idea is that you are using some of these things like summarization or redirection by agreeing with them and making it humorous to make it so that you can de-escalate the tension. And then from there, you have to make the decision. Maybe if it's the bar and it's like, hey, that's not that big a deal, I can go to another bar. Hey, I'm sorry I offended you, man. And you move out. What's it worth? Okay, maybe your pride, but that's not very, pride's not that big a deal. A lot of people have gotten into big trouble because of pride, and it's not worth the pain or the money that may come out of, getting in trouble by getting into a fight that you could have easily avoided. and go to a different bar. But now if it's like your house and someone's like, if you don't let me into your house, I'm going to, okay, that's a different scenario. Now you just hard stop that because this is your house. And so you have to understand your environment, know your operational environment, as they say in the military, know who's there, what was going on, and then what's being said. And so those are some of the ways that you can de-escalate a situation and make sure that you are able to walk away without really getting into a fight in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Great advice, man. I like that one where you talked about summarizing. I never heard that before.
Yeah, it's not something I made up. This is something that I just learned from people that are smarter than me. The idea that you summarize what they're saying, because it could be something completely different too. And it's also good, as silly as this is, it's also good for relationships. When you're with your spouse or your significant other, or like that's just a family friend, and sometimes we can misunderstand. Even when we think we know someone, we misunderstand what they're saying. And if we can misunderstand what somebody is saying, that's our own family and someone that we're very familiar with, then how easily can we misunderstand somebody that we don't even know? And so the idea of summarization, of being able to say, let me make sure that I understand you, and then you summarize what they're saying. They may say no and then adjust it. And then you go, oh, so now, and you re-summarize again. And then they may say yes, or they may say no. It depends on what is being said and how they're understanding it. But then it allows you to make a more informed decision rather than reacting rashly and then having things go out of proportions when it could have easily been avoided.
I think we all need to brush up on our self-defense skills, because as the economies become more and more desperate and there's going to be more and more crime, so we both need to defend ourselves better, and also we need to learn as a society to help each other more. That's one of the good things about Austria. Even though it's really high taxes here, there is less crime, because I think everybody under the age of 30 gets like 500 euros a month or something like that from the government. It's just like, but then you've got this crazy taxes that you pay here as well. But people are feels more safe. So is socialism a good trade for the feeling of safety here? Even a lot of Americans will say Britain's a socialist state, but it seems to be less of a socialist state than Austria. And Britain's quite a lot of stabbings, but even that said, we don't really hear the term in the UK much about deadly force. It's more an American thing you hear, because there just seems to be a lot more killings in the streets. What that does leave, though, is that a lot of the population is defenseless. So we saw that example of those three terrorists. They made these ceramic knives and they tied them onto their hands, and they went about in a group of three, and they picked off people one by one. That's really, really hard to defend against that unless you are a trained knife fighter. But one against three people are willing to die is bad odds. So I don't know if anybody who was basically carrying a knife. I mean, what kind of knife can you carry legally anyway in the UK? So you're immediately at a disadvantage. The only way out of that situation would basically be if you had some kind of walking stick and you were an absolute beast at that walking stick and hitting at each person's arm immediately, one after the other, without missing. Then you might get out of that situation. And I'm actually tempted to get one of those walking sticks, because you can take them everywhere you go, and they're basically just a stick. But for me, that's the best self-defense weapon you can get. Because even if you have a knife versus a knife, you're still at risk of getting slashed if you meet knife on hand. And if you have a pole, you can basically swing that and hit the other person's hand quickly, and hopefully that ends the fight.
Yeah, what you just brought up just now is basically what they had to do several thousand years ago when they used farming tools. They had to figure out what their environment was and what they can and can't use, and they made martial arts systems out of it. In this case, with a walking stick, if that's something you're able to carry, then maybe carry it, because that's going to be one extra tool that you have in your environment that you're able to carry. Also, too, it's like that it reinforces, since you can't go to carrying knives, since you can't go to carrying a firearm for good or bad, that's where it's even more important that in that environment, that people also in that environment use more situational awareness, that they're more aware, that they understand what kind of skill sets they have to run away and get away quickly, or be able to fight back, how they are hitting those targets. Because a person with a knife, I mean, one of the things that I got taught, to back it up a little bit, is I got taught early on, doesn't matter how good you are, you will get hit. And so Doesn't matter how skillful you are, you will get hit by somebody will hit you. And the same thing goes with, it doesn't matter how skilled you are. If somebody has a knife in their hand, you're probably going to get cut. You're probably going to get stabbed. And so, with that being said, that's where it's even more important to understand what you understand and train to be physically ferocious, if you will, when you have to be. One of the best ways that I got taught this summary for the mindset is to think like you are a house cat. A house cat, as funny as that sounds, very nice, does its own thing, tries to keep to itself, hangs out in the house, eats the food, sleeps all the time, once in a while it likes to get pet. If it gets cornered by an unruly child or another animal, it tries to get away. If it can't get away and it's cornered and there's no way to fight, it will fight tooth and nail and become a tornado ball of fur and just go ham until it can escape again. And that's the mentality that people should have today, is that they should think like fighting like house cats. They should have the skill set and the willingness to do whatever it takes to get out of that situation. And then when the opportunity presents itself to get out of that situation, get out of that situation. And so if somebody comes at you with a knife, you need to try to run away. If they chase you down and they're faster, then you may need to turn, maybe get cut or stabbed a couple times, but you hit them in the eyes or whatever you need to do to fight back. Or if you have that walking stick, start swinging. I mean, that kind of thing needs to be one of the things that people mentally prepare for in that environment if it does happen. Hopefully it never does. And as terrible as it sounds, hopefully somebody else gets picked and not you. And so, but if you do get picked, what are you going to do about it, and how are you going to go about doing it? And that's the question.
Yeah, I think to even reduce your chance of being cut in a knife fight is basically you need to be wearing Kevlar gloves, or as I tested in one of my YouTube videos, chainmail gloves. I tried cutting them, and you can't cut through them even with an axe. So you need to be wearing some kind of Kevlar gloves, and ideally a Kevlar stab-proof vest, and also forearm guards as well. Kevlar slashed here, Kevlar again, protect you from slashing movements, and a neck guard, Kevlar neck guard, because the neck's the most vulnerable part. And then ideally ballistic glasses and a Kevlar beanie. Well, I guess you can't really get stabbed in your head, but you can get ballistic glasses that I actually shot one with an air rifle and it just bounced off. So that could probably protect you from an initial stab in the eye. So it's just guess, do you want to always be wearing these Kevlar clothes? In summertime, it's going to be kind of hot, so it's like the balance. Are you going out in the nighttime for whatever reason in dark alleyways? Yes. Well, then wear some Kevlar protection and wear some, I don't know, have a walking stick with you. But in general, don't go out those dangerous places, and you'll not have to basically be tanked up like that.
No, I mean, definitely. I mean, if you can wear all those things, and that's more power to you. But then also too, you'll stick out like a sore thumb, and everybody will take notice. And that also can be to someone's detriment. So like, that's where, again, you coming up with the skill set and having the tools in your tool belt. There's going to be some tools that are more valuable than others. Think of just like literal tools. You have a screwdriver, you have a hammer, and then you have things like table saws. How often are you going to use a table saw? Not that often. So you got to figure out what you're going to probably use the most often, and then train those things in order to make sure that you have those tools on your toolkit ready to go in case you need to use them. And so that way you don't have to wear all that Kevlar when you walk out in the street.
It's all with the screw. When it comes to carrying things, I'm always thinking about what is if you're up against somebody with a knife and knows how to use a knife. So, and basically, a good knife fighter, they basically behave like a fencer. It's a fencing match. So, like with the screwdriver, you're still going to be. You can still get a risk of getting stabbed with a knife, even if you're extended out. I did a bit of fencing at university, so you're always sort of like you're using this arm to push you away, and using this arm to launch out, and so you need something longer than the other person's knife, because your target is their hand. Because I did a bit of sparring with play knives once, and the trick was always to try and hit their hand. That was the target, the closest piece, because you don't want them to let them get anywhere close to you like that. So you basically have to create reach. But But
No, I
a
mean,
lot of this Kevlar clothing, you can wear it quite covertly, great man style. I mean, they're not that thick, just like normal gloves, black gloves, and the Kevlar sheath in your arm to protect your arms from
mhm.
slashing. That's quite thin, and the neck just like a normal neck thing. It's made of Kevlar. It's not that standing out. If you want that extra layer, because I saw that video of that guy getting stabbed in Australia. Did you see that
Mhm.
video?
No, not yet.
He's bleeds. Oh, it's disturbing. This big guy comes up to this smaller guy and just basically flick the blade and gets him in the neck, and he's like that, and the blood's pouring down, and he just no one's there to inject tablets into his neck to keep him from bleeding out.
Yeah, that's the scary thing is, and that's why situational awareness in your social environment is so important, because a lot of times people think that a fight's going to be. There's actually, let me back it up. There's two things that people mix into one when it comes to fighting and self-defense. This was actually coined in my mind first by a person by the name of Tim Larkin, who is a self-defense expert. I really respect a lot of what he does and what he says. And one of the things he talks about is the difference between social posturing and violence. And so when it was broken down, social posturing would be some of the situations that we kind of already covered. Like if I saw you and we weren't friends, and for whatever reason, there's just an error between us that we don't like each other, and one of us calls out and says, hey, stupid, get out of my face. Why do you keep looking at me? What, you want to do something? And that all that happened was I socially postured myself, similar to how two lions would posture themselves for the right to run the pride, or how a couple animals that are, maybe a predator wanders into another predator's territory, so they start fighting it out until one of them gets away. That would be a social posturing scenario where I'm not there to kill you. I am just posturing to make sure that you know who's boss and that you back down. And that kind of stuff happens out in the street all the time, especially at bars or other social events, where people, especially under the influence of alcohol, will get a little uppity. They'll say things that they normally wouldn't say, and that's where fights happen. And not, most of the time, you may have even seen this at times where someone says, "Come on, hit me. I dare you. Hit me. Hit me. Give me a reason," because they think that they're not going to get in trouble if they get hit first, which is not true. At least where I'm from, it's not true. Whoever does like the most damage, typically, if it's not a self-defense situation, is the one that's going to get in trouble. But those things are social posturing scenarios. When it, like what you talked about with the person that just walked up and stabbed that guy in the neck, that's violence. That's where that person wasn't necessarily, from what I'm understanding, as far as you describing it, didn't give that person a chance, just walks up and does
They
it.
they were posturing.
Oh, they were posturing. Okay.
There were
And
two
so,
gangs posturing against each other.
gotcha.
Yeah, two gangs.
So in that sense, that also changes not too much, in fact, because when it comes to gangs, social posturing and violence can be one of the same, but for a lot of other people, it's not. You may be thinking you're socially posturing, while the other person thinks, no, that we're playing for keeps, and isn't posturing, and then causes a lot of violence, whether they pull out a firearm or other things, and you thought it was just going to be a fight to see who's socially the better person. But the bottom line is that there are plenty of other scenarios. Prisons, if you know anything about a lot of prisoners that are in jail, they'll make shivs, they'll make other sort of weapons, and they'll just sneak up on somebody and just take them out as quickly as possible and walk away. They'll drop the object and just walk away. So if somebody's like standing in line for lunch, and then a person walks up with their sharpened toothbrush and stabs him a few times, and then drops it, walks away, and the guy tumbles to the ground bleeding out, that's violence. There's no posturing there. There was no chance. And so that's why it's even more important that people are aware, because there are people out there like that will just sneak up to you and get too close to you and then do whatever they need to do to you at that moment. And so that's why it's really doubly important that in your environment, you are paying attention to your surroundings and knowing who's in your bubble or who's trying to enter your bubble.
Yeah, even a stick from the ground, a blunt stick, this stick is a deadly weapon.
Mm-hmm.
It can, if it doesn't go into you can go into your chest. It can definitely go. If I was up against a dog, a stick this size would be a great instrument. And if you practice with this thing to get some muscle memory, it's lethal. And the human body is so frail. It's almost frustrates me. I once said in that podcast, I wish we could have like Halo armor, reduce the amount of injuries we could get. So Yeah, a sharpened toothbrush as well. The human body is, even, like I had one podcast, even like a blunt butter knife, it can just go in you as easy as almost like a blade sometimes. Well, I guess leather jacket might be different, but basically just going into a butchery and sticking that thing, you can stick that thing right into a cow or something. Just,
Yeah, it's
idea.
incredible because the body is so resilient yet, like you said, fragile. It's pretty fascinating. In fact, a lot of people. That's why, again, when it comes to fighting and self defense, a lot of people misunderstand and misrepresent where they're striking. Again, like a lot of people like to go for the face. Well, the face, it has the skull, and the skull is there to protect the brain, which is the computer, and it's one of the most vital parts of the body. Which, by the way, isn't it ironic that the brain tells you that the brain is the most important part of the body? I don't know. Anyways, I digress. But the thing is that with this natural body armor that we have, it is protecting that area. And a lot of people go for it because they see the eyes, they see the face. That is a symbol of identity. And so people seek that, they headhunt. And that's where, and they kind of forget a lot of the other targets and softer areas that are on the body. And so one of the other principles that, is should be utilized in self defense is hard weapons to soft targets, soft weapons to hard targets. So, as an example, if I use a closed fist, I am not punching the face because this is a hard target. It is a skull. It's almost like natural, like a helmet. And though I may get a knockout, I also may just mess up my hand. I'm not wearing boxing gloves. And so instead, when I throw a strike, if I'm using a hard weapon, I should use a soft target like the solar plexus, the stomach, the liver. These are areas that I should strike. I should be striking more body when I am using a closed fist. If I'm going to be striking the head, it should be an open palm. Again, a soft weapon to a hard target because this preserves my hand versus beating against it and chipping away at my own hand. And basically, because it's a smaller thing, 1/4 of your bones are going to be in your hands and feet. And the fact that you're using all those small bones against one big structure just doesn't make sense. And that's where people's hands get messed up. That's where hands get broken. That's where the term boxer break can happen. And so, that idea of, because the body is so resilient but also so fragile, that's where you need to identify the areas where there's more resilience and where you can actually create an impact on a person when it comes to protecting yourself. So identifying those targets and then making sure that your weapons fit the target.
Yeah, if like I'll put the mic down so I can explain. I'll talk loudly here. So like, if you punch and hit this elbow, it's game over for your wrists, right? You're just going to shatter a bone. So if someone comes up like that, one of my favorite things in Krav Maga is if someone's coming in with like, you can tell it's coming up a bit way off. What you can do in this Krav Maga is you come up like that with the elbow and the other elbow like that, and you basically run at them, right, into this part of the body. And while you do that, you stick your head there and pull both legs up, and you go. That's the first thing they taught us in Krav Maga. They put a mat behind us, but it was quite a thump when you hit the ground. And it's I mean, you can't get a much better protection than that, for your head if you see it coming. Obviously, if someone's got an knife, you can stick it in you. But I mean, if someone's just, that's one way to end the fight right there.
Sure. I mean, and that's the idea, is you want the fight to end as quickly as possible. And how that the more tools you have, the more training you have, the more often you'll be able to dictate how that fight ends, whether that ends with you, hitting them in specific areas, whether that means you hit them a couple times and then disengage and you try to run away as quickly as you can, like we talked about. I mean, that's the beauty of it, is that if you understand these principles of motion, then it will make it easier for you to properly defend yourself in the environment you're in. But that also comes with an admonishment, because this whole time we've been talking about self-defense and a lot of the benefits and little things that people should know. But for those that may be listening and thinking, hey, I want to start self-defense, or I already have some self-defense experience, but I need to get back into it. One of the things that I suggest is when you are looking for an expert or a martial arts, school to go to, Krav Maga, I've said before, is in the past to others, is a good one to start with, and even train fully through. The point, though, is, and the admonishment comes from the idea that you need to come in with the mindset that you are learning self-defense. And that sounds rhetorical, that sounds redundant, but what I mean by that is there's a lot of martial arts schools that are trash. They're just bad. And I'll say that outright. There's just some really bad ones, not because they themselves are bad people, not because they themselves are necessarily bad at protecting themselves, but because of today's environment, like we talked about with people with their low attention spans and whatnot. Think about it this way, because I'm actually pretty traditional in a lot of things. There's a lot of things that I think there's value in tradition, but I think there's a lot of problems with traditional martial arts because 2,000 years ago, the idea of tradition, the definition on a basic level, the definition of tradition is that things are unchanging. They don't change. They're the same as they were taught from its inception. That's the idea of traditional. It's the same thing every time. And the problem is, like you talked about with suicide bombers and stuff, our environment has changed dramatically since 2,000 years ago, since 1,000 years ago, since 500 years ago, since 30 years ago. A lot of things have changed. And you need to make sure that what you're being taught and who is teaching you, or if you're doing the teaching, that it's coming from a place of what is adaptive to today's environment. It doesn't mean that there aren't certain special things and there isn't a place for traditional martial arts. There's a lot that can be learned and stem from it. But at the same time, when you are going in to learn, your mentality should be self-defense for today's environment and how it applies. And so if there's an instructor that can't answer those questions for you very well and just says, well, this is how we've always done it, find a different martial arts school, find a different self-defense instructor. But if you're having somebody who says, this is why we do it, and this is how we do it, and this is how we can apply it, that's where you can find some value. So like not all martial arts schools and instructors are created equal. So come in with the idea that it's used for today's environment. Krav Maga, I brought it up a couple times, is a good place to start and be, because it stems from Israeli martial arts, and Israel is constantly being bombarded all the time from different, other countries, and they're constantly in combat. And their idea is when you have a person coming off and they turn old enough to, they have to serve. There's a mandatory service in their military, from what I understand, and you only have to serve, I think it's a minimum of 2 years. How do we get that person to be able to protect themselves and fight back very quickly? And so that's the idea, is that it teaches them the basic skills they need when they're under pressure, under duress, to be able to fight back and protect themselves. And therefore, that's why that's one of those good places to start with. But make sure that your mentality is that you are going to make sure that it's adaptable to today's environment, and it's not just the same thing that has no purpose. Why are we standing in this fighting stance? Why are we doing this block? When are we going to actually apply it? Those are the questions that need to be asked.
One thing with Krav Maga is you basically have to train as hard as you can without getting hurt, especially with things that involve the neck and neck defenses. I made a mistake recently in Ukraine to try and teach a Ukrainian Krav Maga, and he was like, okay, this is cool. And I says, do this neck lock on me that I just did on you. And he did it really hard, man. And man, my neck was sore for 3 or 4 days. He got me right in the Adam's apple. So my neck, one of our friends, you know who he is, he called me pencil neck, It's just, I don't know how you make the neck strong,
Sure. There's some good ways to make the neck strong. There's like back bridges and stuff like that wrestlers use. That's why you see those wrestlers with those thick necks. But the bottom line is that application training is super important. It's like the main thing. There's like 3 things that martial artists train. They train in the air against somebody who's compliant, who just will throw a punch or a kick and just hold still while you go through the motion. Then there's beating up on a heavy bag or a dummy or a bob or something, as they're called. But that thing isn't fighting back. As Bruce Lee once said, boards don't hit back. You don't have that same resistance. And that's why things like MMA and boxing and kickboxing and jiu-jitsu come off like they're more real than other traditional martial arts styles, because those guys are applying. You see them actually choking people out. You see them knocking people out. It doesn't mean that those other movements, techniques, and stuff from other traditional martial arts can't work. It's just that most of the time they're not doing a hard enough effort to apply what they're learning in a reality-based environment. There's like actual full body suits that do look like halo suits that people can wear. They're very expensive, but then that person can go full out on that person and just beat the tar out of that guy or gal because they're covered in that full body suit. Like, you got the neck guard for neck strikes. You got all sorts of things that can be used, and you can actually try to apply what's learning, and you'll find out very quickly, man, this didn't work, or man, this does work.
Sounds like
And so
something I need to try out. If yeah, definitely
it's
try that
amazing.
out.
Yeah, they're full body suits. They literally look like Halo, ODST uniforms. I mean, they're just incredible. And I used to wear them when I was a pup. And my pops would be teaching special operations guys or gals or law enforcement. I mean, I'd be the 17-year-old dude in the full suit going at it, and like, I'm not trying to necessarily harm the person, but I'm putting a lot of pressure on them, because I'm in the suit, they're not. And then they can go full out and just headbutt, and they can, smack around, like knock me down and sweep me. And I'm not going to take any injury whatsoever because of the suit. And it's very mobile. And so that's one avenue. But again, like, the idea is that they need to apply what they're learning. And so when you're learning martial art from somebody, if they're not taking that extra step to actually make you apply against a living, breathing person, then they actually aren't teaching you self-defense. They're teaching you a martial art. In today's environment, that's different. Martial arts and self-defense are not the same thing.
Yeah, I think you said this video to Stuart McGill. Hello, Stuart. Your Krav Maga classes in London were the best. But I didn't really enjoy those classes because it was 2 hours of getting beat up pretty much. Not beat up, but it wasn't enjoyable. It was enjoyable afterwards, but it was suffering as well because you were getting thrown around a lot, and often with other muscular guys as well. And it was just, and especially with Stuart McGill, he was just the scariest guy to practice stuff one, but he showed him some stuff there that you would just, they could just kill you, snap your neck up instantly almost.
Mm-hmm.
All these sort of neck cranks that you put you in, and then he says you always, but when he says be careful, you got to be careful because a lot of times he just let us go at it, but when he says we're doing neck stuff.
Yeah, when I watched that video, one of the things that I've seen a few like him, but if you didn't know, if he was just in regular like pants and shirt out in the street, you wouldn't guess that he could move as quickly as he does.
Yeah.
And that goes back to that, you don't know who you're fighting. And that's an excellent thing to have, is that ability. And people are just unassuming of that individual. That's like the ultimate. Because if somebody's walking around big, scary, tattoos, everyone's instantly wary of them, regardless of how cool tattoos or big muscles are. People notice and they stick, and they're going to look. But if somebody's unassuming, like my dad, he's not very tall and bald head, the shiniest bald head you'll ever see. But you wouldn't think that he could do what he does. And I mean, even with the skill sets that I have and the experience that I have, I couldn't hold a candle to my pops. My pops will whoop me, like he's just that experienced, and it's incredible. You wouldn't think that he could do that. And there's, seeing that video and looking at that man and going, man, yeah, he's another one. Like, he's another guy that'll just, mess you up if you're not paying attention, especially.
Mm-hmm. So basically, in summary, the thing that frustrates me the most is like you could spend all your life learning about all the martial arts, swing samurai swords at 100 miles an hour, and dodge bows and arrows. But then again, all it takes is somebody coming up from behind with a small pistol, you're dead. There's no way around that.
And that's the problem. Is you can't. There's a lot of variables that you can't control when it comes to violence, and that's why it's best to slowly garner up those skill sets and those tools, because there's so much that you already can't control. That what can you control? What can you, or at least make sure is not out of control? By training those things, you'll build what's called muscle memory. And that muscle memory will make it so that you do those things naturally without having to think about it. That's what mastery really is if you can do something without thinking too much about it, if at all, because your body naturally responds to it. And so if you're able to think about less of those things and less of those variables and stressors, then you're able to pay attention to other things that you don't have as much control, like a person sneaking up on you. Now, a pistol is a pistol. I mean, there's not too much you can do about it. Criminals will break the law and do violent things regardless of what the law says or what the consequences are. That's just the sad truth of it. And so when it comes to those situations, again, step one, if you're wandering around and you are being situationally aware, you're going to get rid of 90% of the potential problems. You're going to notice who those individuals who might be drunk walking up the street, and they seem like full of bravado and, just very rowdy. you'll be able to see that in that group and go, I should move across the street. Now you've avoided a potentially bad situation. Maybe nothing happened. If you were to walk past them, maybe nothing will happen, but you don't know. So you err on the side of caution, you move across. Okay, now you're on the other side. You pass by. And so with that being said, what's nice is that you'll be able to then take on a ability to, after that situational awareness, move into, now I'm going to try to de-escalate. Now that I have some of the skill sets to de-escalate, I'm going to try to de-escalate. And as you de-escalate, you're also not just giving up on the idea that something may happen, but you are trying to de-escalate the situation with the idea that the worst case scenario is you're going to have to do something. De-escalation works, so great, you move on. Well, if de-escalation doesn't work, that's where you're going to have to do something. And hopefully you'll have the skill set to back it up, do the strikes you need to do, and then run away as quickly as possible. That's on a basic rudimentary level, the layers that a person needs to be rounded out enough to protect themselves out in the street. There's a lot you can't control. You can't control that person coming out with a pistol and shooting you. But if you have some of these other skill sets in the back of the mind, the situational awareness, the de-escalation, and then the physical skills, and then the ability to run away or create space. If you have those pillars, you'll be able to be that much more confident because you are that much more competent with your capability to keep yourself safe. And therefore, you'll stress out on less of those things and you'll be able to focus on other things that matter. And when those things do come up, you'll already have the training and the repetition to be able to make the correct decisions without having to freeze and be worried about what that decision is because you have the training.
So everybody, this is Adam Jolly, and I recommend you go and visit his podcast. I think it's the No Nonsense podcast. I'm already in episode 2 or 3. It's a lot more. It's basically this on steroids. It's just great podcast, great information, and it's things that I'm listening to. I've listened to a lot of self-defense podcasts, but he's coming up with things that are new to me. Like, for example, training. Well, you could train on your bed with martial arts just by thinking about the scenarios, like with people that pretend to do basketball without a ball. They almost learn the same as they had the basketball. So you could train, and you're like in the podcast you said, you could train to be under a knife attack. You could go through your mind and it'd be uncomfortable, So these are some of the things you go into detail in your podcast. I recommend everyone checks that out, and I wish you all the best for that podcast.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, man. So where can people reach out to you?
So some of the best ways that you can reach out to me are through Adam@smartsafedefense.com. That is the company that I just started. The whole idea with the company is that we'll teach people who don't have the time or the money to put in a lot of that into self-defense training. They'll be able to get some good tips, some good mindsets, good training, both indirectly and directly. And eventually we'll be coming out with a self-defense course very soon that will be able to cover how someone can learn how to defend themselves in 14 days or less. And so Adam@smartsafedefense.com. The other thing that you can do is check us out through the podcast, the Get Real Self-Defense podcast. And then last but not least, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I have all my connections socially through Linktree from there.
All right. Any closing piece of advice for us?
So I guess the closing piece of advice is, at the very least, if there's anything that you pull from this discussion, practice situational awareness, if anything else. At the very least, have that, because if you're aware, then you can become more adept to making sound decisions and knowing what's going on in your environment. That means making sure that you have one headphone out, making sure that you are not looking at your phone the whole time. Make sure to always be able to take in who's in your environment, what's going on, and that will solve the majority of your problems. But that is only one facet of it. You should also train those other facets as well. But at the very least, do situational awareness.
Cool. Well, Adam, thanks very much. I look forward to meeting you in person one day, and hopefully we can do some more collaborations.
Absolutely, Nikos. Looking forward to it.
And thanks everybody for watching the Nikos Show. See you again shortly. Bye-bye.